Welcome to Leap Leaders Unplugged, where your host, me, Siobhan Neilland, takes you to an exploration of the extraordinary paths of influential leaders and innovators from both the corporate and the nonprofit sectors, who are both making impactful changes and redefining the future of business and beyond. Through these engaging discussions, the podcast seeks to empower you to spark innovation and change in your own organizations or your own career, transcending both financial success to helping you fulfill aspirations for purpose and freedom in all aspects of work and life. Whether you're a corporate executive, an inspiring entrepreneur, a nonprofit leader, or an established business owner on a personal quest for self-discovery, Leap Leaders Unplugged provides the motivation, resources, and community to guide your journey. Don't forget to subscribe now and join our movement of visionary leaders who are not only navigating, but actively shaping and hopefully revolutionizing how the world is built.
Ready for joining us for another episode of the Entrepreneurial Edge. I'm very excited about today's guest. Oh my gosh, this woman, man, she's setting the world on fire. She has been for a long time, and now she's about ready to do it yet again. And she is a powerhouse in the talent acquisition world. My guest today is Siobhan Neilland, and I'm going to let her introduce herself because I don't feel like I can introduce anyone as well as they can introduce themselves. So I'm going to let her take over the mic and introduce herself, and then we'll get started with a wonderful conversation, I'm sure, to highlight all the amazing things that Siobhan brings to the table as a game changer in the talent acquisition world. So without further ado, Siobhan, take over.
That was a lovely introduction. Thank you, Ms. Dawn. You are also a powerhouse that I'm very honored to be here today. So my name is Siobhan Neilland, not spelled at all like it sounds. And I am a CEO and Chief Talent Officer for Leap Ahead Talent Solutions, as well as I'm the CEO and founder of a nonprofit organization called the One Mama Organization. I created a social funding platform called Joy Equals Success, which helps people fight for their joy and the joy of others by funding really nonprofits like the One Mama Organization by using social economic sustainable programs. So I'm an entrepreneur to my heart. I started my first business in elementary school. So I'm on the social entrepreneurial program for a lot longer than I realized. But, yeah, so that's me.
Such a great little origin story. You know, that reminds me a little bit of Gary Vaynerchuk. I think he did something similar when he was like very young in elementary school. So wonderful. This is episode 3, by the way. So we're asking our listeners for a little bit of grace because we are still finding our momentum, but you know what? You got to start where you are and just begin. So I have kind of the same question that I ask every guest, and that is, tell me about the day you decided to take the leap into becoming an entrepreneur. But I think you're in your next first day of re-entering the world of entrepreneurship. So you tell me where you want to begin, where you should really hear about your origin story with regard to becoming an entrepreneur.
Yeah, so I'm relaunching, and part of how you and I have a relationship is I brought you in to be a fractional marketing officer and helping rebuild and rebrand my talent acquisition, leadership development, inclusion, diversity, equity, belonging, consulting, and fractional work or income operations and executive coaching. So this isn't new work to me, but I'm rebranding it, changing how I work with customers and clients and companies. And you've really helped give me some more of that sort of, again, it's a new beginning. And I think what's interesting about being an entrepreneur is that I have probably had a new beginning about every 10 years. Like I kind of, again, I did start literally my own company of cleaning houses, mowing lawns in 5th grade. And that's how I got my first car at 14. Looking back, it's pretty clear that I just had this in my bones. And then when I really started this journey in talent acquisition, I was bedridden. I was sick. I couldn't perform music anymore. I was a professional musician and my body fell apart and I couldn't work anymore. And this was way before people worked remote. And I didn't even know how to turn on a computer, but someone had said, hey, will you call these companies for me while you're laying in bed? And so you can find out who their salespeople are. And so I just happened to be natural at it. And so I became involved and created my own staffing organization and built a whole team and built a whole methodology and became one of the top, what was then back called researchers, and helping companies develop before LinkedIn, before the lists of people of how you would call to offer opportunities to. And I built a large staffing organization that really built on developing all of the front end and turnkey solutions for Silicon Valley companies and building out their recruiting. So we were turnkey solutions for those and helped also manage those on-site resources of talent acquisition. And then the world changed and I lost a lot of my senior staff because they were retiring. And so I moved and started actually becoming more in-house, where I'd come in and do more fractional work and really kind of come in and build out a program or build out a staffing or create some sort of high volume program that I would build out. So I've been consulting in this space a very long time. So as the market changes, I think this is the key thing about being an entrepreneur, is that you have to change with the market. Like when LinkedIn came, basically it took away the work that I did in the way that I did it. I had to come and do work in a different way. And I think what's happening, we're in a space right now, which is part of why I'm rebranding, is that talent acquisition, leadership development, inclusion, diversity, equity, belonging is all radically changing in the market right now about how companies utilize that, how they think it's important, how they spend their budgets on it. People are kind of going back to some old bad habits, even though during the pandemic, people were sort of trying some new things and innovation. So there's some backlashing going on right now. And I think what's really going to emerge in 2025 and 2026 is some really interesting outcomes of how all of this radical change is happening right now. So I'm preparing to build that out in a new way. And what I thrive on is building out organizations that really move the needle of change. What I started to see is that in the beginning, this was a role that I could make some money while I still did my music on the side or my creative things. It was not something I didn't think I was very passionate about. And as I've grown in this career, I've become very passionate. And then as I did find my passion as the CEO and founder of the One Mama organization, which, by the way, One Mama organization helps impoverished women have babies safely in sub-Saharan Africa. It's a birthing center, a medical center, and an economic sustainability. So all of those, I have like 20 different social economic programs that help fund it. So it's a self-sustaining nonprofit, and it's all run by Indigenous people except for me. And so really trying to empower that. And the goal is to build these wherever women have babies in places where they live under $1.25 a day. So I've started this in 2008 for the loss of a baby. When I was working at Google, I lost a baby and went out to go sort of heal my heart. So then the social entrepreneur created a new business. So I've been working with both the corporate and the nonprofit since then for 18 years, and constantly, no matter whether I'm in a full-time role or whether I'm consulting in fractional work, I'm always running the nonprofit and running a team of anywhere from 20 to 40 people internationally to keep that going. And as I started to fund that and build that, and as that grew and thrived, and I started to do more international work, I started to see I want to have the same feeling in the work I do in the corporate sector. And so when I started to build out more programs, I think it first started at Google. And then when I got moved into consulting for Amazon, building out more programs that really change the way we hire talent, really looking at your picture. How is it incorporating into your goals? Making sure you're adding more inclusion and diversity and belonging into how you're hiring, and then also training your leaders about how to interview better, be better managers, so that you create this environment, this ecosystem that then creates really cool products and services that your customers are excited about. It creates this whole thriving ecosystem, and moving that needle of change actually is much more organic and exciting and fun. And I can bring those same principles that I had in the nonprofit sector of giving people the tools and the resources to change their lives. I could start doing that for not only just the individuals in these corporations, but also the corporations themselves. And that was how we ended up creating a program called LEAP, Leadership Engagement Advancement Program at Amazon. So that's kind of like where the journey is. And now I'm really excited because I've started building out these types of talent optimization frameworks for companies, really building out their leadership development, their talent acquisition, as well as their inclusion, diversity, equity, belonging as this holistic ecosystem, and with processes and frameworks that build it. Most people just go look for the people, and that's really missing the mark. You have to have the foundation of the house. And so that's what my organization does, is we build out the foundation of the house so you really can have inclusive, belonging environments. If you don't have that, you're just not going to be a thriving, successful company. And the really cool top tier performers are not going to want to work for you if you don't really have that. And your customers are going to feel that, and they're not going to want to buy from you or take your services when they don't feel that they're a part of that.
Having now worked with you as a client of mine, to be able to really see how much inside baseball and specialty you have with this kind of signature framework, this talent optimization framework that you just mentioned. I'd like to talk more about it because I think it's something really special. And I think a lot of times people use the cliche that someone or something is a game changer, and it's not necessarily true. However, in your case, now that I have really seen the framework and I've looked at the actual results, this is a proven talent optimization framework, and not just on a surface level. You're not just saying, I think this works. It actually works. Like, you have some really significant case studies at places like a Google or an Amazon where this was what you did within those organizations. So, if it can work there, it can pretty much work anywhere. But the core part of what I like about how you're truly a game changer is you do see it from a different perspective. It's a very dynamic 360-degree perspective, so that when you come into an organization who has this need, it's a holistic approach and it works. And I'd love for you to share a little bit more about the Leap Ahead talent optimization framework that you have built and why it is so unique, and what it is that you see that makes you so remarkably different from any other fractional talent helper. Clearly, you have the chops. You've been in the trenches for 18 years plus, and you've been able to demonstrate that this framework works in for-profit and nonprofit. And, also, just to toot her horn, because she didn't mention this, but this woman that is here today is also a UN delegate for the work that she's done in the nonprofit world. Like, she's a heavy hitter. She's humble, but I'm going to go ahead and toot that horn for her. You've been on a TED Talk. This woman is not only qualified, but an expert in her field. So let's talk more about your talent optimization framework and really how it works and what makes it unique and true for you, that gets the results of not just more happy people. That's a wonderful end goal, but like cultural change from within, and revenue growth, and momentum for an organization to continue to create the system that attracts talent at high levels on repeat. Let's talk a little bit more about that.
I think it's kind of simple. When people feel seen and heard, there's all these studies that show they will perform 25% better. It's just a simple study. There's several different sociology studies that are based on this premise. My work in Uganda, again, I see the same thing. Like, when people feel seen and heard, you don't even have to do that much. You just have to hold a space where people feel seen and heard. There's an increase in performance. Companies are made of people. You can build all this infrastructure and have strategies, have all this stuff, but if you don't deal with the basic concept that people need to feel heard and matter. Like, in my nonprofit work, I said we all want to feel like we're loved and we matter. And I think the same thing goes in the corporate sector. And if you can build frameworks and methodologies and mechanisms that help hold a space where people feel held and heard, they will just organically perform better. I've done this work at a couple different companies, but when you build out, it's just like raising children. You give them boundaries, and when you give them boundaries, they feel safer to take risks, try different things. What happens a lot of times is we don't put those sort of guardrails, those nice, emotional, intelligent safety points that are organic, that people unconsciously feel or don't feel, and then they react to. If you don't put those in place in a company, you're not going to get the performance that you need to do whatever the goals are. It doesn't matter what the role is. It doesn't matter whether it's engineering, marketing, sales, recruiting. Does none of these things, even at the C-suite, if you do not give your leaders the guardrails, the boundaries, the emotional intelligent tools and foundation that they need to structure how you're going to move forward, they're not going to be able to perform better. It's such a simple concept. And I think, honestly, I come from a pretty hard knocks background. And I think that I learned this the hard way in my personal life. And it seems like such a simple concept that I don't see most people approaching corporate or even nonprofit infrastructure. So even some of my counterparts in nonprofit sector, they're still trying to tackle and solve and come fix people's problems. They're not actually empowering them with resources to help people empower themselves. If you don't empower, kind of one of the cool things that I learned from Amazon is that everybody's considered a leader. It doesn't matter what your role is, you're considered a leader. And when you do empower people like that, you will get innovation in a different way when everyone feels like they have stake in the game. And I think the same thing goes with building out frameworks in companies about how you build your talent out. Like really, it does matter how you do it to attract that top tier talent. And it does matter how you manage those people, those leadership development skills. Like I can't even tell you, I'd say 75% of the companies I come into, the leaders literally do not know how to interview their candidates. They are interviewing for sociopath. They are not. And those are the people that they're hiring. They're hiring the people that say, hey, I'm the guy, I'm the gal, I got this. When actually you want someone who's a little bit more humble, who's got their head down and doing the job and really has this wealth of knowledge that they're so humble and excited about what they do, they don't actually know how to talk about it very well. It's such a simple concept that most people in my field aren't paying attention to. And if you can't build a framework that is attracting that and also make sure you're harvesting those type of, growth opportunities and building your teams, you're going to miss out where things are going. Most people think they only track the diversity and inclusion, diversity, equity, and belonging because it's an easy metric. You can say people come from this background or they have this particular gender. It's easier to track in a dashboard these types of things. But diversity is so much more than that. You need diverse voices. Like the fact that my background is all over the map, and I think being an entertainer and being able to be on stage with famous people as a child helped me be probably better in the tech sector in a weird way than the other training I have around organizational development and anthropology. I think that there's that ability where you're able to read situations and be able to react and respond to them. And that's another form of diversity that you're not going to be able to get on a metric, right? And that's going to create more inclusion and belonging because I can read people and they can read me and we can have this back and forth and then we respond and we go innovate and create together. What I see companies do is they build these very rigid, well, we only hire people who do this. And then you miss out on all of these other kind of gray, and sometimes actually hiring is a little messy, or getting your leadership bench to be able to truly have like an open-ended, like I was just interviewing on my podcast, this amazing leader, she's my mentor, and she's talking about how as someone on the C-suite, she goes back to her team and she says, here's my blind spot. My blind spot is that I can sound very clear and defined about what I think needs to go. And so everybody goes with me. She's like, I need you as my team to not do that. I need you to push back and show me other options we have. And I find that so refreshing because then you're now going to get a much more engaging and empowered team to go out and solve more problems for your customers. And these kinds of things I feel like are simple and organic, and yet they're very uncomfortable because it's not rigid. All my programs, like the LEAP program that I created at Amazon, Leadership Engagement Advancement Program, that program increased diversity by over a 4-year period from 5% to 49% at this leader level. And it was very organic. It wasn't contrived but you were coaching the candidates, you were coaching the leaders, you were creating more inclusivity panels so people had engagement, both from the candidates to the leaders and the leaders to the candidates. They were having more open conversations that weren't related to the actual interview. And what that changed is this dynamic. And then those divisions performed better over other divisions. Again, all we were doing is we were adding this emotional intelligence and giving a structure to add that emotional intelligence communication. And then how it bolstered, I would have never in a million years thought it was going to bolster that extreme over that time period. And then it scaled globally because it was so successful. It just mushroomed. And that's things that I've seen even in the smaller companies. It's not quite as big in the smaller companies, but when you have, dedicated frameworks put in place where people can use these kinds of skills that have a structure that brings out emotional intelligence instead of just one or two key figures that have the emotional intelligence to drive the company forward, then you have game change. That's when it really is like moving the needle of change and game changing. And to me, seeing these changes was so exciting. It was like building the nonprofit again. It was like building One Mama. It was like, oh my God, look at how we can change this in a company like AWS. Oh my God, this is extraordinary. And it's kind of simple, just listening to people and letting them have a structure that they can listen to each other and see how to interview differently and see how to build their teams differently and see how to answer the customer questions differently because they've got the right people in place that the customers feel safe with now, those kinds of things.
Yeah, that is some compelling data. But it's two types of data, right? It's like actual tangible data, but it's also like the work that Brene Brown does, storytelling data. So there's something to that. And I feel like what I wonder when I hear that part of your story and how you operate and what you bring to the table when you come into these organizations is, how do you teach that emotional intelligence? Is there something within your framework that enables people to uncover that or detect it or learn it? Is this something that is teachable? What part of that element of the Leap Ahead program and talent optimization framework, how do you do it? I think a lot of people tend to struggle with that, and it's not necessarily even safe to have those more vulnerable conversations. Or in the example of your mentor, what a wonderful leader to say, to go back to your team and say, I have a blind spot. This is my vulnerability. And I need you to be mindful of that to keep us moving in the right direction by telling me, giving me almost negative feedback or constructive feedback. I think that's a very rare thing. So on both sides of the equation, it's hard. I've been in both roles. I've been the leader that gets the constructive feedback. And I've also been on the other side where I've been the employee and the leader has asked for constructive feedback. And I don't know how to say this, because like in a role where you're supposed to just support whatever the leader's saying, it's not to be questioned. And we, I think, all naturally come to that. If you're in our generation, like where I went to school, it was like, you got to just be the good student. You're not going to question authority. And that can be really hard. So how do you manage and navigate that on both sides of the equation within your system of operating in your framework, Siobhan?
When I'm working with leaders and developing them and developing trainings to get them to think about how to interview differently, how to manage their teams differently, like what true inclusive and belonging behaviors look like, usually you first have to get people to see it in themselves. I feel like most people have some form of an imposter syndrome. Like, there's some conditions where people truly can't see anything wrong with themselves. But I feel like I work with some of the best leaders in the world at the top companies, at the top of the game. And it's really fascinating to see how many of them feel, oh, I'm not technical enough. Oh, I'm not this enough. Oh, I wish I'd done. Like they're always wanting to be that next step better. So they're constantly looking ahead. And part of that's an American culture thing, but I do see that even in working in other places, in other leaders in Europe or in other parts of the world. I think it's just a human behavior it's a way we better ourselves. But what's interesting is we could say, well, why didn't they talk about this? I'm like, well, how did you talk about your first job? Oh, well, I did this. I was like, yeah, that doesn't tell me much. I call them out, call them forth to say, tell me how you would explain XYZ that you're doing right now. And then they'll ramble. Almost always they will ramble. Now, so there's some extraordinary leaders who don't, right? But then they'll say, oh, you're right. I don't know how to talk about that. And it's like most of us don't know how to talk about that. So if you're not able to bring that out and talk about it for yourself, how can you expect someone to do that in an interview or when you're managing them or trying to get them towards a promotion? We've all been taught, especially in staffing and as hiring managers, that you look, I'm going to start a little line if those of you listening, but you're going to go like up a little magical hill. And that, you go from this job to this next job to this, it's all this little magical hill. It doesn't actually exist. Most people's careers are like hoop-de-hoops. They don't know what the heck they did last time. Wait, what was it I did? Who was that client? Like, we always are moving forwards. We're not paying attention. And I think one of my, skills is to bring authenticity, bring people back to like what actually is happening for you. And then if you can see that in yourself as a leader or as a counterpart, then you can see, oh, yeah, actually, most of the top performers I know don't talk about themselves very well, right? That was what I started to see, was that about 75% of the top performers that I was looking to bring in for, VPs or senior roles at the top companies, and they were listed as the top person at Apple or the top person at Google, they would come on a call with me and say, oh, I'm not sure I'm technical enough. Oh, I'm not sure I'm a senior leader enough to run this XYZ organization that you're talking about. And that's when you start to realize, and when I would give those examples to the leaders I'm trying to hire for, think about some of your best players. How would they talk about themselves? They got tapped for that role. They don't really know how to talk about themselves. And do you know how to talk about yourself? And that usually softens it. And now I've got their attention. And whether it's developing their leadership team with new trainings and getting them to see how they're managing, or they're managing, we still have a lot of very masculine ways that we manage companies and manage our people when our teams are, like 50% of the population is women. And you can't manage women the same way as you manage men. You can't manage different cultures the same way that you, like if you're from the US and you're managing, different cultures in different countries, you have to be accountable. You have to think about these things. You have to think about like, hey, if I'm asking my staff who's on Ramadan to do XYZ, that like during the month that they're fasting, that might not be a good time to do a software sprint. It's such a simple concept of thinking about in this broader thing, not through your own personal lens, but through this bigger lens of how do I move everyone forward, and not also go down the rabbit hole where you have to be so nitpicky that you're only thinking about each individual's culture and each individual thing. How do you move forward as sort of a moving team and being more inclusive in how we're thinking, and like asking what people feel like belonging is? You can assume that I think because you're a woman that you want to, talk about kids. Well, you might not want to talk about your kids. You might want to talk about something else, right? So ask like, hey, Dawn, what's important for you when we got together? What's important for you? Like, what is the things that motivate you for you to go to that next level in your career? What can I do to support you in that? So as a leader, I'm asking open-ended questions. As an interviewer, I'm asking open-ended questions to really see people's potential versus this very rigid, they need to answer this certain way, or that's why, Google quit using a lot of those brain teaser questions. There's only a small percentage of people who can answer those. Those don't really work. Those don't hire top performers. Really do have to ask open-ended questions about show me how you work so you can come translate that over into my organization, or lead so I can see how you do that and where your blind spots are so that I can mentor you up, make you even better. That's the stuff where, again, to me, the thread between it all is being vulnerable, authentic, and lots of emotional intelligence around really thinking about how you can want humans to do certain things, but they're not going to do them if they don't feel safe.
Yeah.
You have to create safety. And we're all just little kids in big bodies. Those things that we needed when we were kids to get safe and healthy boundaries to function as children, we need them as adults too. And it's weird, companies don't really always get that. And you could hire the best top performer who's the best in the field, but if it's not a great culture, you're not getting anything out of them.
Yeah. And I think that's that's where the rubber meets the road, pardon the cliche, but like you see that this is actually working. Like it's not just woo woo, it's real. Mm-hmm. And it in the right seats that foster the change and the results in these large level organizations. And I think it's so interesting too. I wanted to just touch on that imposter syndrome concept a bit. And I'm sure that you clearly do see it because you've been hearing about it. It resonated so deeply for me to hear about that. And I'm sure, our audience for this podcast is going to maybe latch onto this a bit too, because that's where a lot of people say, yeah, that's me. And I don't want to talk about it. Or I don't know how to talk about it. Or I feel like I'm the only one. It's a very isolating concept to have that feeling, even when you hear these high performance individuals at these big Silicon Valley organizations experience the same thing. It also makes me think about, there's a part of Brene Brown's book where she talks about being on Oprah and how Oprah had once shared with her the one most common question I get from every single guest I've ever. And they lean across the table and they say, was that okay? And this is like big celebrity people, who you wouldn't imagine had any lack of self-confidence or, self-sense and grounding. And she's like, yeah, every single person asks me the same question, no matter who it is. So I feel like maybe you can talk more to that in regards to how your system operates, like whether you're actually an organization, whether that's the one-on-one or actually working a team. How do people, I don't know if the right word is embrace the imposter syndrome or overcome it or accept it? Which is it? And how do you work with that on both sides of the table?
I think that's a good question. I work in imposter syndrome words all the time, and it's sort of an ambiguous thing. I saw this really great lecture during the pandemic where this woman talked about there's 6 different types of imposter syndrome, which I thought was really phenomenal. And one of them is perfectionism. Mm-hmm. So if you think, and usually top performers tend to be perfectionists or tend to be like, I need to go to that next extra place. Right? Usually the type of person who says, oh, I've got this, I'm the best at this. They're actually usually not. There's a TED talk on this as well. Mm-hmm. You may have heard of. And usually those people are actually the lower performers, the ones they're not the best. They need to go to that next place. They're usually at that 80 to 90% performance. And so those are usually that form of imposter syndrome that I tend to work with the most, which is that idealism, it's a form of perfectionism, and that I could be better. It's like the Olympic athletes. They're always, I can get that extra second down. I can get that extra team to do this, like all of that. And that to me, I think is fascinating, but most people aren't aware that they have it. And even I pointed out to them, then they'll forget. And, we're back to square one. I think in the work that I do, people want very tangible things. So they'll go to the diversity numbers, or they'll go to, oh, well, it's women, or it's minorities, or it's, this particular, if we hire people from this particular school, or if we hire people from this particular demographic skill set, those things are a piece of a puzzle. Basically was for all candidates at the senior level.
Okay.
And that increased by 35%. Anyone who came through my program, an on-site to offer success. Just not by skill set or, industry or anything. It was, or age, any of the our own blind spots around their imposter syndrome, leaders looking and having the tools of how to interview better and looking and asking more open-ended questions, having it on both sides. This framework all of a sudden just organically created average year over year, a 35% increase in on-site to offer success. Wow. At the end of the day, most of that was imposter syndrome. It wasn't for both the leaders as well as the candidates. that was when I started to see, and the ones like that really suffered the most in the imposter syndrome were the people were like been promoted all their career. They didn't know how to talk about themselves. These are those people who everybody wants to hire, but then they come and they bomb an interview like Amazon or Google because they don't know how to talk about themselves in 2 minutes. Who can usually talk about themselves in 2 to 3 minutes are usually the people about TED Talk talks about of like, I'm the guy, I'm the gal, I'm the person, and they're actually not. They're the ones who are just really good at promoting themselves. They're not actually good at doing the actual work. And that was where I started to see the difference. Now, this is very, membrane. It's not like there's nothing formulated about this. And like,
yeah.
In 2022, we had 12,000 people come through the program. And we saw the same metrics, and we saw an even higher tick, even when we went global. So it wasn't even just an American thing. It was where in the world, and then we moved it to all different levels, not just senior level. And we saw the same issues around their skills. And same thing when the leaders had more information about how to ask questions differently, more open-ended questions, all of a sudden their candidates got better and their interviewing got better. And now they seem to hire better. They had less hiring because they're not having to replenish all the time because the people hired the wrong people. And those divisions start performing better and making more money. I think that's what I have the hardest time selling, I guess you could say, is that it's a very simple formula. Everybody wants all these AI tools and different special applicant tracking systems and diversity tracking programs. And to me, none of those have really moved the needle of change. They can be like a tool that can be helpful in alignment with some of these particular talent optimization frameworks that we can build, but they don't take the place of it. This is one thing that AI can't do. It can't evaluate this humbled place that really those people that have ingenuity and innovation, they don't know how to talk about that ingenuity and innovation. The really, really good ones, they just go do. And you have to interview to be able to figure out how to pull that out. And you have to have a proven process that this is how you do it with every interview. An interview that way, you're not going to have across all of your employees and all your different levels some sort of process. That's one of the cool things that Amazon has, is it has that, very intricate, like every candidate is interviewed with the leadership principles. But even that has its own flaws in the sense of it's more behavioral, and most people don't understand the leadership principles that are outside of Amazon, and the recruiters don't always explain it very well. So then until you're finally in Amazon, you're like, wait, develop means, oh, that's what bias for action means. Like, it doesn't quite translate until you're already in the company. So I think we lose, and part of what the LEAP program did is it helped those candidates build enough tools so they actually understood what those leadership principles actually meant, that they were getting judged upon their career, and then, hit the ground running and be like, oh yeah, this is the kind of person we want to hire.
That's so good to hear that real concrete situation as far as translation to data. But when you were able to give a specific example of how its translation to results was, there was this thing around, core principles that kind of got lost. It was all inside baseball, and it had to translate across to candidates that were coming from outside the organization. And once leadership understood that, or to translate to open-ended questions, to translate to communicating downline to the candidate, this is what we're about. These are really important principles. Basically, we hire and fire against these, right? But we attract with them as well. But they have to be meaningful on the other side of the court. So like the person fielding the ball, or if you would, like in a sports analogy, like to catch the ball, you have to tell them where to stand. You have to tell them what's coming, and let them understand what game they're playing. For the framework. So that was super helpful. And, in all the conversations we've had, Siobhan, that gave me some clarity too about how and what you instituted in a place like Amazon and what made it so successful to attracting key talent. So, and it is simple. And I think sometimes you said too, isn't there an AI tool that can do that for me? Isn't there an app for that? No, this is people things. Like, this is real human stuff. And, there's not an app for that. This is about having connection and conversations with the people and seeing the people that your applicants are in the system are actual human beings. And they're not always well equipped to speak about themselves, even when they're high performers. So we have to kind of teach one another how to talk about each other in a way that's going to be meaningful and help us determine who the best person is to come in long term and reduce turnover, because those costs are really high. Like, they're high financially. I was thinking about you the other day. This is just a little anecdote. I'm house hunting here in our new area. We're in Alabama now, and we're transplants from Massachusetts. So that in and of itself is like, what's the language here? But we're house hunting. So, we were looking at this house, and it'd been on the market, and there's all sorts of reason homes are on the market for a really long time. And this is probably true about candidates too, that I'm sure you've seen in your world. But we're always kind of curious. Like, me and my husband tend to lean in with curiosity, like, I'm sure there's a story here. I'd really like to hear it. That's going to help me make a decision. Is this the right house for us? Is there something critically damaged about this home that we don't want to touch? Or is it just the home's had a rough go? And so where it occurred to me to think of you was, we were touring a house the other day, and it had been on the market for 84 days and didn't really seem like much was wrong. It was a little dated. It needed some fresh paint. But as far as all other intensive purposes for what we're looking for, it was a suitable candidate. And the realtor was saying, it was under contract and the person lost their job. And I stopped and thought about you, and I thought about just generally, like, how quickly things can change when somebody gets fired, and how that trickles down, and what are the actual costs. This person obviously lost the opportunity to own a house, but the mortgage company lost an opportunity to help them find. This person was unable to help them obtain a home, and all these people lost on their mission, right? And I additionally thought about you. I'm like, I wonder if that's one of those situations where Siobhan's framework would have prevented this person from ending up losing their job and this opportunity to own a home. And it goes broader than that. I understand that corporations, if there's not a fit, in some places, it's time for that person to move on to their next best fit. But I did think about you in that moment, and I was like, this is probably, there's some element of why Siobhan does the work that she does. It's not just about the bottom line. It's not just about reducing turnover, but it's really helping the right people get into the right places where they can thrive and this company can thrive and their customers get the benefit of all of that. But yeah, it's that reality, I think, that is a license for you and your framework to enable people to show up and speak to who they are. And I'm hopeful that this person who lost their job and lost the opportunity to own this particular home was being put in position next to have an environment that was better suited to them because of people like you. So I don't know, for what that's worth.
I think it is really simple. I've been hired many a times because I'm a specialty in creating innovative talent. They say, we want you to come do that. Then they bring me in and they don't want that. And they like the idea of it, but so they hired really the wrong person. They want somebody to come in and do status quo. Like, I was hired for this one company to come in and change their C-suite and their VPs to be 50% women, because it was all men. Every time I brought a female candidate, they decided to hire a male candidate instead. My whole goal was to change the gender, make sure there was more equity in there and balance, because their customers were demanding it. And they wanted it at that really high level. And that I was there a year, and that just didn't happen. And I'd call them out. It's like, hey, you brought me in for this. Is this still what you want? And I think that's what I also see. And part of what I try to do when I get brought in to come in and look at the talent frameworks and leadership development is really look at the 1, 3, 6, and 10-year goals of a company. Mm-hmm. And what do you really think? Like, most people just want to go throw engineers or recruiters or sales or marketing people at a job, when actually that doesn't align with, they're actually not hiring the right people. I see over and over, and part of why I see, I have a couple executive coaching clients, and they'll say, this role is up and then it's down. And it's like, they probably don't know what they were wanting to hire. They put a job up because they felt like, oh, I think I need this thing, but they didn't really, vet it through all of the different things of what do we really need. And there's not really this think about it. There's not this long-term like strategy looking at that. And so people just start hiring people. And that's the sad part, is that people then, and I don't know if this is what happened to them, but I see it over and over. They really got hired for a role that really didn't exist. And the company never hired that role. And then that person is never satisfied. And then the company's never satisfied, but they blame it on the person when actually they didn't hire the right person. They didn't follow along with what the company really needed. And that really one of the things that, while what I work in is this sort of mushy place of emotional intelligence, these methodologies and mechanisms that you have to put in place as a strong foundation so that you can deal with that mushy emotional intelligence, human element stuff. And you then tie those strategies and those foundational pieces to your company goals, to the individual goals, and that you then look at the whole ecosystem and go, oh, where would that be at 6? Where would that be at 3? And there would be 1. And even if you only want to hire 2 engineers, you still need to go through this process of where does this fit in the long term, especially if you're a smaller company. 2 engineers is a lot of money. And if you didn't actually need 2 engineers, but you need a product manager and an engineer, that's a game changer. So thinking through that a little bit more is the bigger arc that I see. I'm just fascinated that people keep doing the same thing over and over, expecting the company keeps doing it and they don't really pay attention. Now, there are some small, lean companies that really got it right and started and putting inclusion, diversity, equity, belonging at the forefront. They baked it into their process. They baked in these kind of talent frameworks, making sure that their leadership teams are always having lots of continuous development, and they're really looking performers and constantly benchmarking that against their 1, 3, 6, and 10-year goals. Those companies you don't hear much about because they're just humming, right? And they're not having all the layoffs. They're not having all that. They don't have as much attrition. And those are the kinds of companies that I like to build out, take these sort of messy ones, then kind of rebuild out their frameworks so that they start to run from that smooth place. One of the things that I didn't really talk about the LEAP program was these LEAP hiring events. They were high volume hiring events that I would get like a bunch of leaders to do panels, do all the interviewing, and they were hiring, let's say, a big group of solutions architecture or leadership, senior leaders, sales leaders. And so we basically get this huge pool of leaders to really look at how they interviewed, bring them all on site. We'd fly all these candidates into a location that were top tier for this particular, leadership level. And then we'd have a panel, we'd have a mixer, we'd have them do all the interviews. And then what we found was when I had it very high touch in these high volume hiring events, we'd have a 50 to 50% on-site to offer ratio. We averaged over a 4-year period, 57% were diverse. And diverse at this point, were the metrics that we were looking at were Black, Hispanic, and women. We tried to add Indigenous, but it was very Indigenous in some of the markets that we were in. But if I was continuing to do that, that would be one of those things where we really would try to spend more time in that area. But those were the markers that we were spending more time in trying to make sure we had. And what was cool is we really had a nice equal representation of all different backgrounds. And so that our candidates weren't all one minority, they weren't all one demographic. Really, all of our slated candidates were all different types of backgrounds. So, a lot of times the leaders were asking me, make it all women, or let's just all make it Black. No, it needs to be for all. And that really made, because it wasn't just in one demographic, that it created this inclusive environment. So everybody feels like, wow, what a nice, interesting mix of people, right? And once we started doing those events, then we scaled it out to break it off so that we did all the interview training, we did all the interview training for the candidates, we broke off all the pieces of those events, and that scaled out to be the global program of LEAP. Kind of interesting, we still did those big high ticket events, but what we found is that it was so much cheaper than doing an agency. It was so much cheaper than our normal hiring, even though we were flying candidates out, we were flying leaders out. And if you go to my website, you'll see our success stories. You can see some of those things, candidates that went through those events that still stay connected with me and say it was one of the best hiring events of their life. These things made them feel like they mattered, that they made a difference. It made them make a decision. Even if they didn't take the role, they're like, this made me really think about what. To me is when you can create an experience that they will come back for that, even if they don't take that offer at this point. And so those are the kinds of things, and those are kinds of frameworks that we create and that I really enjoy creating because they make more sense. They really do move a company forward towards its goals and to being a better company for our culture, for our world. I want to revolutionize how corporations and nonprofits are built. I think they're not built with the right building blocks, and we need to bring that heart and soul back.
I see you doing that. I have the fortunate position to be watching this from the inside and knowing it's just such good stuff. Like you said, it's relatively simple. It's not overly complex, and it works. So what's not to love about it, and what's not to get excited and passionate about, especially from the leadership side. I know in my experience in 18, 20 years off and on, the biggest struggle is in the people and how much wear and tear it puts on an organization, no matter how large or small, when you just don't have the right people in the right seats and you get turnover, and it just slows the whole system down. It frustrates people. They're unable to stay on their game because this is a big deal. People matter in good and bad ways, right? When you have somebody who's just also not a fit and kind of perseverating that happen at the level of the person who has to make the call about whether this person stays, or the other team members that are in the organization that struggle with somebody who's not in the right seat. It's real. It's a huge drain on an organization financially, emotionally. The costs are high. So to know and see what you are doing to help these organizations avoid that pain, but also give opportunity to all. Gotta say, it's the thing. It matters. The work that you're doing really, really matters. So let's talk about how people can find you and work with you, Siobhan. Where is the best place for anyone who is on either side of this experience, whether they are looking for an event like these hiring events, or they need you embedded within their organization to take advantage of the Leap Ahead talent optimization framework, or even some coaching? Let's talk about how people find you.
So the best way to find me is at leapaheadtalent.com. That has sort of all the different offerings that we do. While I'm a fractional talent officer that comes in and usually helps build out the main framework, I also have a bunch of experts that partner with me that come in and help build out. Like if I come in and see, they really need a diversity officer to build out some of these frameworks before they hire their chief diversity officer, I have some great people that I bring in for that. I have team members that help me with bias training and interview training. So I have a lot of things. So it's not just me usually two main things that I do. I work corporate work where I come in and mostly as a fractional leader and really evaluate what do they need. And sometimes they already have a lot in place that's working. They just need some tweaks. It's leadership area interviewing that I really saw that's where I could then build out that framework. I have another company that I'm doing bias training and helping where, they were having some legal infractions because their field member and doing things that were inappropriate. And so just building out sort of replicatable frameworks that they can not just have me in once, come in, let's build out a system. I really believe in systems, not one-offs. Most of the time, especially with diversity and inclusion and belonging and bias training, everybody just brings in a trainer. Or I come in, I do speeches. I used to do a lot more public speaking, but what I found is they'd have me come do a big speech, keynote speech, and then those people never do anything again. And so it was not, it was fine to me. While I still love doing you, and that way your company can guarantee scaling. And then the other thing that I do is a lot of executive coaching. So right now I have a roster of executive coaching clients that I really coach them with that next thing in their career, trying to move towards a promotion, building out some strategy around their talent, their frustrations, and maybe managing their C-suite team, combine it with personal development. I've done a lot of personal development. I built out a course called Fighting for Your Joy of Others. It's a year-long course. It's really a personal thing that I did. It doesn't really have anything to do with my corporate life, but I built out a lot of personal rituals that really helped me from going bedridden, from having very bad health, and put those systems and those personal development work. I really combine that with my executive career coaching and help people build a plan that combines these. Again, I think it's the same common denominator. If you don't build out the wholeness of people in the world, it doesn't, you could be, we see so many executives who are miserable. They're making all this money and they have the career of their lifetime and they're miserable. And that was what's the point? You want to be able to do the things you love and love your life. And those are the things that I coach on as well. So I have, that part of my business is called Leap to Success. And you can find that on our website as well. And I do, a lot of private coaching and some group. Do every now and then some free classes once a month where I teach people how to interview through imposter syndrome and how to build tools. There's so many people who are laid off right now and really struggling. And I want to make sure I'm giving them the tools to thrive in this crazy world that we're in right now. Yeah. And then if people are interested in my nonprofit, you can go to onemama.org. 100% of the proceeds, I've never taken a salary from that role, even though I manage that crazy thing, that 100% of that. And so $100 saves 50 mamas and babies. So everything goes towards that. And my classes, my interview club coaching masterclass, 100% of the proceeds goes to funding One Mama. So, even a lot of the coaching work that I do, those proceeds will go towards keeping the clinic running and funded.
If people want to reach out to you on LinkedIn, is that something else that you are open to?
I'm totally open to that. I mean, I'm almost at 30,000. So pretty soon, I don't know what's going to happen when I reach the marker there. I might not be able to say. I use that as a place to really create connected relationships and really to have it be a place where we can support each other in career development.
Wonderful. Well, this has been so amazing to hear the groundbreaking, game-changing work that you're doing with your organization. And so true. He's very humble about this, but if you really think about what you heard today on this podcast, it should kind of blow your mind and inspire whoever's listening. And it sounds like you can really help people on both sides of this equation, whether it's executives within an organization that know that something's not quite right, or they're seeing the signs and symptoms of having the need for a better framework or a little tweak, as you said, for you to come in and just take a flyover and give some observations and feedback on where you see some of the pitfalls. But also with these wonderful workshops that you do, where somebody who is potentially a wonderful prospect or candidate for these organizations that might come across your path, but to be informed about how to approach a gauntlet in the search world for finding their next best fit job, where you can get some encouragement and guidance from Siobhan. And that's extremely valuable. So thank you so much, Siobhan. I appreciate it.
It's always a pleasure to hang out with you.
Thanks.
And I'll give Dawn a bunch of my little website domains that you can put in our little chat. So if you do want to reach out to me, you can just reach out to any one of the way too many websites that I have.